If you were a kid growing up in the 2000s, then you're well aware of all the TV shows that featured badass gadgets and equipment that you wanted to get your hands on. Yu-Gi-Oh! Had the dual disc and all the cards, you were able to get the watch from Ben 10 and it made all the sounds and shit, and then they released the second watch that looked 10 times worse. But the biggest issue a lot of these things had was that even as a kid you could feel that disconnect between all the cool shit that was happening in the show and the boring shit that you were doing in real life. For me, I really felt that a lot when Bakugan came out. Like in the show, there's all this,
oh my god, what the fuck?
And these things barely worked too. Like they were rolling them onto the cards in the show and they'd pop out and there'd be a cool monster. But in real life, this shit was a pain in the ass and the reward was just this. Back then, I was thinking, damn, why didn't the Ben 10 watch actually turn me into a cool guy? And I was on the hunt for that show that would work the same way in real life as it did on TV. And then I can't stress enough how insane it was as a kid being able to use these Beyblades in real life the same way they were used in the show. Like most of the time, your imagination is what carries half the fun as a kid, since these toys didn't really do much compared to their TV counterparts. And alright, listen, maybe there's some stuff in Beyblade that isn't quite one-to-one with our reality, you know, it's up for debate, but Beyblade was still easily the most similar in terms of the real-life experience of playing it, matching the experience of the show, especially compared to its contemporaries. With Beyblade, it felt a lot more like Pokemon, where you weren't throwing them out in real life and seeing a Pikachu in your living room. Yet, but the Pokemon games gave you that same experience and it felt pretty one-to-one. Only in the case of Beyblade, you could physically hold these things in your hand and play with your friends just like the characters in the show. These things also look badass. Even before I watched the show, I remember seeing these things on store shelves and thinking, holy shit, I gotta get one of those, these look sick. I remember them selling the stadiums too, that stupid fucking briefcase one that turned into a stadium. That was awesome. I don't know who's walking around carrying their Beyblade briefcase, but if you wanted to, you could. Having these things physically was amazing, and I sunk way too much time into just messing around with them for fun with my friends. But while the actual Beyblades in real life were sick, you just can't talk about Beyblade without talking about the anime. If you're somehow unfamiliar with Beyblade, it's brain dead easy to understand. You get 2 or more spinning tops, 3, 2, 1, go, last top spinning wins. Super easy. The anime does add some light power systems through the lore, with each Beyblade being inhabited by a spirit of some kind, in the series being referred to as a bit beast, but in general they just made the Beyblades physically stronger and allowed for some more visual flair in the battles. So the game was still fundamentally the same. The main characters had a cool spinning top that they used to kick some ass against another one. And I think that simplicity, combined with some genuinely awesome Beyblade designs, really gave Beyblade that initial burst in appeal. And the anime really leans into showing off all the cool unique Beyblade gimmicks along with all of their bizarre subsystems. In short, there are 4 categories of Beyblades you can use, those being attack, defense, stamina, and balance types. And the fact that you can usually recognize each type of Beyblade just by looking at them is another testament to the real consideration that's gone into each design. And aside from these archetypes, there are also abilities that are entirely unique to each Beyblade, and some can get insanely niche and creative. There are spring-loaded Beyblades that can bounce around, Beyblades with different modes, some have hidden blades that appear as the battle goes on, some can do this shit. The level of individuality they can give each Beyblade in such a simple format is genuinely impressive, and definitely helped each character stand out much more, especially those with less screen time compared to the main characters. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Beyblade anime is strange because it's a little scattered in terms of its releases, with multiple seasons across different reboots coming out over the years. To summarize, there are 3 mainline Beyblade animated series. There's the original 2001 series with 3 seasons, there's the 2009 Metal Fight series again with 3 seasons, and then there's the rest that we'll get to later. These releases don't directly connect to each other, so it's better to look at them separately rather than as one continuous series. So with that in mind, let's start off with the first series that I watched, being Season 1 of the original 2001 Beyblade anime. Above anything else, this series is, at its core, a sports anime. The plot revolves around various tournaments involving the main characters, and the final goal is almost always to win in whatever matches they have lined up, with all the personal stakes that come with that format. Instead of a more traditional storyline, both Beyblade series are much less focused on what's happening outside the stadium and a lot more interested in showcasing the battles themselves. There are narratives that we follow outside of the battles, but the bulk of the story is taking place in the stadium, and to me that's one of its greatest strengths. After all, the Beyblades themselves are awesome, and so of course they'd want to focus most of the runtime on the main characters just throwing down. It feels less like a traditional anime season and more like following your favourite sports team on live TV. And the show is acutely aware of that feeling. One of the things you'll immediately notice upon watching this series is that it really leans into selling that exciting sports event feeling. It mainly does this by showing the tournament matches through the lens of a live TV broadcast. There are stat displays of each player, fancy transitions and motion graphics. There's even a watermark in the corner of the screen during the live broadcast sections. It's a lot of small touches, but they really go a long way. While the stories for each match weren't always particularly complicated narratively, they more than made up for it with the professional-looking fanfare, along with the sheer emotional weight and investment in each character's own personal storyline. And even with that in mind, the show does genuinely succeed in making the main cast surprisingly likeable to the point where it feels like I'm cheering for my home team out there against the world. And seeing the show present itself as a live broadcast was the icing on the cake that really hammered in that final nail of immersion. This format was so effective that it even allowed for the real-life ad breaks that air on real live TV to fit into the canon of the story, as the show simply frames those real-life ad breaks as a cut to commercial during downtime in the matches.
Hello and welcome back to sunny Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm Brad Best, here with AJ Topper and a full-capacity crowd anxious to see today's semi-final match.
These commentators, Brad Best and AJ Topper respectively, also deserve a mention. Their ability to cast a fictional sport as if they've been commentating it their whole lives is insanely impressive. The chemistry between the two of them is always a joy to listen to.
A final session tie! Who'da thunk it?
Not us. We're talking heads, not fortune tellers.
And highly paid ones at that.
Think for yourself.
And what's wild about these two is that both of these commentators, along with all the live TV graphics, are exclusive to the English dub of the show. This was in an era where anime dubs weren't so much faithfully translated, but were much more focused on being appealing in their own ways, unique to that localization.
Look at all this stuff. Candy bars?
Dibs on the candy bars.
Potato chips?
Dibs on the chips.
Canned fruit? Soda?
Dibs on the soda.
Joey, I don't think we should cook the candy bars.
Back off, I know what I'm doing.
But because of this, I think it allowed for commentary that was a lot more familiar to a Western audience, since there wasn't any insight or jokes that could get lost in translation. And it makes for commentary that's genuinely funny, not like anime humor funny, but just funny.
Is it me, AJ, or is Luis's Beyblade actually responding to his moves?
Good eye, Brad. That's why they pay you the big bucks.
Again, this may all not seem like much, but the show's commitment to this live TV vibe is a damn effective way to drum up the immersion. The show really wants to sell just how big Beyblade is in this universe. And I think this played a large part in the popularity of Beyblade in real life. Because the prospect of beating your friends and winning big tournaments like the characters in the show, however fictional that may be, was a cool feeling that made you want to battle people. Except it's not fictional, because there's a real-life Beyblade World Championship series that pulled in players from all over the world to publicly declare an official champion. They even have the fucking announcer from the show, like it's the exact same guy from the show. I remember when I first saw this, I must have been like 10 years old, and I saw the Beyblade World Championships on YouTube, and I was just floored. Just imagine me trying to convince my parents to fly me out to the World Championships and how that conversation went down. The fact that they actually made this a thing is genuinely amazing. I'm sure every kid who had the opportunity to compete in events like this will never forget it for the rest of their lives. At least I know I wouldn't. But its existence also confirms Beyblade's core appeal of being, above anything else, a form of competition.
That's the key to the success of the brand. It's really it's a sporting tournament brand.
But even though my dreams of being the Beyblade World Champion went tragically unfulfilled, I was still able to go on that journey with the incredibly likable main cast of the show, consisting of Tyson, Kenny, Ray, Max, and Kai. I'm a fan of a lot of anime main cast groups. If your story isn't complex or your world building isn't terribly deep, most series can stand on two legs if they have interesting and well realised characters. as you can put them in any situation and their own individual appeal and chemistry with others will still shine through. The Yu Yu Hakusho gang, the Z Fighters from Dragonball, and the main group of basically any JoJo's part all come to mind here. But even among those, the original Beyblade's main cast is one of my personal favourites. The group initially forms together as each of them qualify to represent Japan in the World Championships. And since the tournament is a team battle format in which a team must win 2 out of 3 matches to advance, it allows each character to shine individually, as each member is only allowed to enter 1 match each against any given team. This allows each character to have that same protagonist status rather than just one of them, to the point where I could easily see each member of the team being the main character of their own series. While Tyson is the character we initially follow, the rest of the cast become equally as important as him, since he physically isn't able to win the tournament on his own due to the team format, inherently driving up the hype for every other member of the team. It also created an environment where no particular character had any extreme plot armor, as there are cases where Tyson could lose his match while 2 other members of the team win to advance in the tournament, meaning that each match carried a lot more tension since the potential for upsets to occur was extremely high. And even if the team advances overall after suffering a loss, you can see the effect these losses have on an individual level, as the players can begin to feel like they're dead weight, giving these losses some real personal consequence even if they win overall. But while they all can shine on their own, the chemistry between them is what makes these guys so memorable. Despite being serious competitors, the show frequently reminds you they're also just teenagers, and the chemistry between them reflects that. And they don't just attend the matches together formally, the show gives them time to just be kids and hang out with each other. They eat together, they laugh at each other, they fall out and get into arguments, and it all creates this dynamic that feels real. There's a moment following a particularly grueling match in which Max has to defeat an opponent whose Beyblade was able to raise the temperature of the arena to agonizing levels of heat. And after barely being able to succeed in his battle, Kai says this.
That was so awesome! Actually, it was pretty sloppy.
Kai, give the poor guy a break.
Hey, it's okay, really. You're the team leader, Kai, so if you think I need to work harder, then I will, okay?
What I love about this exchange is that you can see the extremes of their personalities clash in real time. Kai's stubborn impatience despite Max's victory, Rei's empathy for Max's struggle, and then Max's response being to just kill him with kindness and de-escalate all the tension. You can see on Kai's face that he'd almost prefer Max give him more pushback here, but instead his complete willingness to accept Kai's feelings has absolutely shut him up more than any insult ever could. And these kinds of interactions are everywhere in this first season, especially with Max. While his other team members tend to get caught up in the pressures of competition more frequently, Max always has the right thing to say to keep their spirits high. And in this case, I think Max is kind of underrated, since he often serves as the emotional backbone of the entire team. It's so hard not to love the guy when he brings such good vibes to every scene he's in. While its long-term story isn't anything groundbreaking, it's the moment-to-moment interactions with each of the characters that really sells their relationship.
I've got a great idea. Why don't you head back first and go call me a taxi?
Not funny.
Of course, the vast majority of the series tends to take place in the stadium, and you can see the individuality of each character much more during their battles. Tyson's quick thinking and tenacity, Max's unshakable defenses and mentality, Rei's composure and razor-sharp technique, and Kai's overwhelming strength and experience, with Kenny being left to take up more of a support role as the team's mechanic and strategist, as he transferred the spirit from inside his Beyblade into his computer, which in itself becomes a main character that Kenny names Dizzy. Look, Beyblade's fucking weird. The show generally prefers to express the personality of the competitors through the way they battle. And despite how outlandish some of the customized Beyblades look, there actually are set rules and regulations in place, like the weight limit on your Beyblade. This consideration is so perfect because it keeps everyone on the same playing field, but it's open enough to where it still allows for the players' personalities to really bleed through in their Beyblades, which definitely helps give these characters with shorter amounts of screen time a lot of memorability. On top of this, there's also some real strategy to be found in how each character customizes their Beyblade along with their launcher, like how Tyson doubles the length of his ripcord to increase the strength of his launch at the start of the series. Even with something as seemingly insignificant as the launchers, this show saw as an opportunity to express the characters' personalities, often showing how their hobbies and interests influenced their style of battling, like this fencing launch from the European team, or this baseball pitch launcher for the captain of the American team. There was no real limit to what you could launch your Beyblade with, so the show got very creative with using the launchers to reflect the personality of the players. And it definitely makes a lasting impression even for the most niche characters. But even aside from the launchers and gimmicks unique to each Beyblade, the series always highlighted how a player's emotional and mental state impacted their ability to compete, and could very well decide the outcome of a match. Like how Rei's Bit Beast will refuse to aid him in battle if he's fighting half-heartedly, such as if he holds back on an opponent out of pity or if he truly believes he isn't able to win. This is such a cool inclusion because it requires him to overcome his own mental barriers in order to become stronger, creating a parallel between his emotional arc and his strength as a competitor. And when he finally does overcome those barriers, his victory is made all the more satisfying, because we see the personal journey he goes on to get there and how it directly contributed to his success. You can have the best Beyblade and the best equipment, but there was always a mental X factor there that played a massive role, and I always thought that was a cool message. I also want to take a minute to appreciate the show's art style and animation. Personally, I'm a huge fan of that 90s anime aesthetic, and this show just reeks of it. The hyper-stylized designs with colours that just pop, the quality of the artwork itself, and the occasionally jaw-dropping set pieces all give the show a uniquely sick visual identity. This should come as no surprise, however, as the animation studio for this first season was Studio Madhouse, the studio behind One Punch Man, Hunter x Hunter, Hajime no Ippo, and so much more. So having this season handled by a studio with that level of prestige was bound to lead to something great. And this kind of completed the package. What you had with this first series was an immersive format, a super likeable main cast, striking artwork and animation, and some sick-ass Beyblade battles. Now wouldn't it be a damn shame if the second season was really shit? The first season of Beyblade has cool, unique strategies the main characters would learn and develop to tackle unique problems, while V-Force is a lot more focused on very vague problems with vague solutions. The show also looks noticeably worse than the first season, likely due to Studio Madhouse taking a step back to work on other projects. From the quality of the artwork and animation, even down to the designs of the main characters being made much worse. And even though it's a direct sequel, the main characters look like they've been significantly aged down for some reason. The old designs made them look like stylish teenagers who were serious about competition, and then right after winning the world tournament together, they just revert back to toddlers. They honestly look like a group of children dressing up as the main characters from the first season. It's that unconvincing. Aesthetically, there's some good ideas, like some of the proportions being made more sleek, but due to the simplicity of their outfits and the quality of the artwork lowering, it robs the show of the unique visual identity it once had, with an aesthetic that now just looks like another generic anime. The 3D Beyblades also don't help this. The first season's matches all featured 2D Beyblade battles with their own unique ups and downs. At their best, they'd look amazing, and at their worst, it'd be a little hard to follow, but rarely did it look boring. Season 2's battles look boring. These Beyblades look like they're being controlled by marionette strings. They move so clumsily, with such little weight, and it's kind of the final nail in the coffin for this season in terms of the action and visuals. The story, however, is also super weak. There's a bizarre absence of any official tournament matches with any actual weight, which means the commentators, along with all the fancy graphics from the previous season, are tragically underutilized. The plots all feel insignificant, there's barely anything that carries over to the next season, and it just lacks any kind of real tension, with many citing this as a filler season that isn't required to get the full story. Myself included, I recommend you skip this one and jump straight to Season 3 if you ever want to watch this show in its entirety. Now Season 3. This third and final season is the true sequel to Season 1, and in my opinion, where the original Beyblade series hits its peak. Firstly, this season introduces possibly my favourite Beyblade gimmick of all time, the engine gear, which allows the user to wind up a spring-loaded gear that can give your Beyblade a second wind late into a battle as your rotation speed decreases. This is such an awesome inclusion because having this accessible to every blader created a really cool back and forth that allowed for more dynamic battles. but it also worked the exact same way in real life. Granting my own real-life Beyblade access to the anime power-up mechanic was a completely unmatched feeling, and it definitely helped bridge the gap between me and the characters on TV who could command their Beyblades freely. Secondly, the visuals of this season are not only a massive improvement over Season 2, but I'd even say I personally prefer this over the first season, mainly due to the more detailed and jagged artwork pairing well with the more serious atmosphere of the story. The characters are also aged up and their designs are a natural evolution of their previous ones. The 3D Beyblade battles return here as well, but they are drastically better, moving with real weight that makes the action more dynamic and fast-paced than Season 1 or 2, with the jump to 3D allowing for more dynamic camera angles and a lot more visual clarity. And on top of that, one aspect of the visuals that Season 3 particularly excels in is the choreography of each fight, using the bladers themselves as ways to communicate the momentum of the match or the strategies being employed. They really push the visuals when they want to, and again, Beyblade is such a simple format, so you'd think there wouldn't be much room for dynamic choreography here, but there absolutely is, and it goes a really long way to keep the action unique and exciting. The show also pushes the quality of the animation much farther, with many more set pieces compared to the previous seasons, primarily through the new special moves unique to each character. There were special moves in the older seasons, but it's only in this one where they've been given the full visual flair they needed to really make a lasting impression. And the high quality of the visuals is especially welcomed here as it helps to sell the more emotional beats of this season, as it's this season where the show's story is at its most ambitious and impactful. Earlier in the video, I said something to the effect of, to the point where I could easily see each member of the team being the main character of their own series. Well, this is the part of the series where they cash that in, as each character chooses to enter separate teams to win that year's World Championships. The teams that the main four join consist of teams that they've previously faced in the last World Tournament. Ray joins his old friends on the Chinese team, Max joins the American team after moving back there with his mother, and Kai joins the Russian team due to his history with them in Season 1, allowing us some more insight into the characters from those teams. But then, where does this leave Tyson? When Tyson becomes the champion at the end of Season 1, we see how this affects his relationship with his friends going forward. The supporting cast aren't just Tyson's friends, they're competitors who want to win just as much as he does. Tyson goes from a hometown hero dethroning established players to becoming one of those established players. And seeing his friends draw that line between supporting Tyson and wanting to beat him themselves makes for some really compelling rivalries that a lot of shows nowadays can genuinely struggle to pull off. With Tyson being forced to find a new team along with Kenny, the original main cast all have their own shot at the championship. And it creates an environment where there's essentially 4 protagonists competing against each other. At one point, Ray even takes a victory over Tyson in an official tournament match. And what's cool is that depending on which character you identify with most, that win for Ray can either be a positive or a negative to you. Again, harkening back to that sports team vibe. Because of this setup, and unlike a lot of battle series, Beyblade doesn't suffer from having an underutilized supporting cast. Characters from Season 1 don't just get forgotten about. Instead, they re-enter the new World Tournament, allowing us to see the subtle changes in their character, with this format also allowing for plenty of highly anticipated matchups for long-time fans. And thankfully, the original commentators also make a triumphant return here to deliver more of their brilliant insight.
Looks like Ray's gone on the offensive, Brad, with his hit no prisoner style.
Kind of like me with the ladies, eh, AJ?
Yeah, whatever.
What's more is that the battles of this season, more than any other, were wildly unpredictable. It's incredibly difficult to call the outcome of a lot of these matches because of the show's willingness to allow its main characters to lose. But the knock-on effect this has is that it adds immeasurable weight and legitimacy to their wins, as the potential for a loss is always present. The way the show plays with your expectations is unmatched. There are plenty of instances where the main characters undeniably deserved to win their battles, but fate robs them of that victory, making for some of the most tense, unpredictable, and outright heartbreaking outcomes in the series' history.
Believe it or not, Crusher has miraculously managed to stay in the dish.
But what about Ray?
Ray and Trigger! Stadium out! Crusher wins!
With all this in mind, the original Beyblade anime was a massive success and briefly caused a Beyblade mania of its own. The symbiotic relationship between the anime and the popularity of the Beyblade product line in real life meant that for a while you couldn't go to any school playground without seeing one of these things being launched. But once that mania died down and the anime concluded, there was one question remaining. Could they do it again? Released in 2009, the Metal Saga reignited Beyblade's popularity and successfully rebooted the franchise, with brand new characters and of course brand new Beyblades. What made the new anime successful was how it kept the same qualities of the older series that worked while cutting the stuff that didn't. Instead of having filler seasons or seasons that dramatically changed art styles, the Metal Saga opted for consistency above anything else, while adding its own new elements when necessary to create an identity of its own. While it does still have that sports anime quality to it, with major tournament arcs and in-universe media coverage of the battles, as the show progresses it begins to resemble something more akin to a traditional shonen battle series, with its large-scale displays of strength rather than being limited to the confines of an official stadium. Which absolutely isn't a bad thing, as it helps separate these two series from each other and gives each of them their own unique appeal. And the visuals really sell this. The final season of the original Beyblade series had definitely found its legs with the 3D animation during the battles, but with the Metal Saga they had mastered it. Firstly, the Beyblades just look better during the battles now. They move with real weight and momentum, helped also in part due to these Beyblades being canonically a lot stronger. Seriously, the Beyblades in the Metal series are strong, bordering on weapons of mass destruction. And the choice to increase their strength in the series makes sense because of the changes made to the Beyblades in real life, as this new line of Beyblades were predominantly made of metal rather than plastic like the old series. And seeing the visuals of the anime reflect that and exaggerate that feeling made for a show that was wild, destructive, and deeply cathartic. And with how far they pushed the visuals to not only give more clarity, but to actively make the battles more dynamic, I can confidently say I don't see any better way for them to animate these battles. Unlike nearly every other anime, the choice to use 3D over 2D here doesn't feel like a compromise to save on production, but rather a genuine stylistic choice for the visual benefit of the series. This series is also where the Beyblades themselves are at their most elaborate and interesting, as the show introduced a plethora of new mechanics and quirks that were unique to individual Beyblades. These gimmicks were present in the original, but here it felt like every Beyblade had its own unique X factor that helped them stand out. It's impressive just how many iconic abilities the Metal Saga featured and just how much it helped make the battles more exciting, as well as giving even the most minor side characters abilities that felt like their own. One of my personal favourites is El Drago, a Beyblade that has rubber protrusions on its side as well as rotating counterclockwise, while nearly every other Beyblade generally rotates clockwise. This allows it to absorb each hit to effectively use its opponent's spin strength for itself, resulting in the iconic spin stealing ability that we see it use in the anime. And I know I'm a broken record here, but this worked exactly the same way in the anime as it did in real life. You can try this yourself. When you launch a full speed right rotating Beyblade and then just spin this left rotating one with your hand, you can watch it steal its opponent's strength in real time and become more aggressive as the battle continues. And let me tell you, pulling this shit out on the playground or against your friends, it absolutely made you feel like the most badass motherfucker to walk the earth. It was unreal. Even characters with very little screen time were still made memorable due to how their Beyblade's niche abilities gave them a way of battling that was entirely unique to them. As a result of this focus on every Beyblade having their own unique abilities, it made for a lot of designs that visually stood out from each other and matched the blader who was using them, which for me is a big reason as to why I also tend to prefer the look of these Beyblades over the ones from the original series. In terms of choreography, the show still succeeds in using the bladers themselves to help convey the power struggle of each match, with some of the characters' special moves being a real standout here. But there are also ways that the Metal Saga conveys its battles that I argue surpass the original series, primarily in how its characters are affected by their matches. The bladers here don't frequently move with the choreographed precision of the previous series. Instead, a lot of the choreography is watching them buckle and recoil trying to withstand the physical onslaught of their current battle, as the increased power levels of the bays themselves demand a lot more strength and vigour than before, making for matches where the physical toll it's taking on the characters is a major factor that can decide the match. While this was a factor in the older series, albeit much less frequently, it was in the Metal series that it became a consistent element in nearly every major battle. And it paired well with the more serious atmosphere and gave a lot of visual feedback as to just how much the heroes would struggle against such overwhelming opponents. There's also a major difference between the original series and the Metal Saga in terms of narrative structure. While the older series was structured through a villain of the week format, with new opponents for the main characters to face in the World Tournament every other episode, the Metal Saga shifted its focus to more long-term, villain-centric storylines in which the plot would revolve nearly entirely around the actions and eventual defeat of its villains. Don't get me wrong, the original series had more long-term villains in some great storylines, but the Metal Saga makes them the main focus for the vast majority of the series. For the first 12 episodes, Jenga, our main protagonist, has been comfortably winning every battle he finds himself in. If his friends get in trouble and can't figure out what to do, he was often the solution, in an easy to watch but fun episodic series. Until episode 13, where the show introduces its first main villain, Ryuga. Compared to every other opponent we've seen so far, Ryuga is monstrously overpowered and delivers Jenga's first devastating loss in the entire series. On top of that, there's also a personal history between the two of them, with Ryuga wielding a forbidden Beyblade that was sealed away in Jenga's village, as well as Ryuga being indirectly responsible for the death of Jenga's father. So not only does this battle shatter our perception of Jenga as this unbeatable hero, but it also displays his emotional turmoil having to suffer a humiliating loss against an opponent he desperately needed to defeat. When Ryuga enters Beyblade's story, the world begins revolving around him, with the main characters shifting their focus to defeating him. And it's this villain-centric storytelling that defines the Metal Saga and sets it apart from the older series. And the increased power level of the Beyblades overall made this narrative choice a lot more reasonable. It's not that easy to feel scared of a villain who just wins a lot of spinning top battles, but it's a lot easier to feel scared when the villains can do this. And this ethos stays true for the entire series. In Season 2, there's a point where the show introduces a new villain by having him fight another one. Our first villain is Julian, the wielder of a Beyblade that can manipulate the gravity around it. He was the first major villain of Season 2 and was characterized as an obnoxious, rich, narcissistic asshole, only for Jenga to barely squeeze a win against him in a tournament match to finally make a dent in his ego. To stay in the tournament, Julian now has to fight the second major villain of Season 2, Damien, a relatively unknown blader but with an ocean of confidence. After his loss to Jenga, Julian has been reinvigorated to take his training to the next level, drastically improving his techniques and increasing his strength tenfold awaiting his rematch. To him, a loss to Jenga was completely unacceptable, and so this match with Damien is his chance to try and claw back his reputation. Only for Damien to taunt and humiliate Julian in a violently one-sided match. Even Julian's newfound abilities somehow pale in comparison to Damien's unstoppable attacks. Making things worse is that instead of ending the match, Damien chooses to pull his punches to extend Julian's humiliation. And watching Julian slowly realize he truly isn't able to win, even after all of his training, you almost begin to feel a little sorry for him, which speaks volumes considering just how hateable he was before this. The once terrifying ruler of the stadium, now reduced to a whimpering failure. Julian's teammates pick up on this and stop Damien from artificially extending the battle and call for the match to end. Only for Damien to challenge and defeat Julian's entire team in one battle, leaving with an overwhelming victory, an emotionally shattered opponent, and a sinister first impression. Now, whether you're a fan of Beyblade or not, that is how you introduce a villain. The way the show invests in its villains and its ability to flip our perception of Julian like this is what makes it consistently compelling, and also speaks to just how well they've characterized Damien as an even more sinister character than him. What this battle with Julian also demonstrates is how the show was willing to focus on matches entirely separate from the main cast, featuring fully developed narratives that were entirely self-contained, as it really sold the idea that there was a massive competitive ecosystem out there that the main characters were simply taking part in. Adding to this was that the show put more emphasis on character-specific strengths and weaknesses, rather than focusing on a strict difference in power level. With the right strategy against the right blader, wildly unpredictable upsets can happen, and it makes for some genuinely jaw-dropping moments. Techniques that are a nightmare for some to handle don't always work against others. Not because of any drastic difference in power level, but more to do with that specific blader's abilities. Take Julian and Kiyoya for example. Julian's Beyblade can manipulate the gravity in the stadium, while Kiyoya can use gale force winds to both defend from attacks and to blow his opponents away. both incredibly strong bladers who are around the same power level. Against the likes of Damien, whose Beyblade can set the arena on fire and scorch the centre of the stadium, Julian's Beyblade isn't as equipped to deal with this kind of attack and loses because of it, whereas Kiyoya has no trouble dealing with it as he can counter this ability by blowing the fire away with relative ease. This difference in interactions is so cool because it's not due to any strict difference in overall strength, but just a showcase of how Kiyoya's unique abilities make this a better matchup for him specifically. This isn't to say that strength wasn't a factor in the battles, it's just that the show put a lot of emphasis on what made each blader unique and how that would affect their matches. On top of this, the show often highlighted how a character's personality influenced their style of battling beyond just their Beyblade's physical abilities. One notable case of this is Tetsuya, who, rather than wielding his Beyblade's unique attributes, instead uses emotional warfare to win his battles, often setting up elaborate personas with tragic backstories to guilt his gullible opponents into letting their guard down or even throwing the match in his favour, only for him to loudly gloat over his victory and leave with his head held high. Sure, it's a bit bizarre and blatantly deceptive, but when he does this and it works, you really can't argue with the results. So even if you didn't have an amazing Beyblade, there were still ways of battling that the characters maximised for their own gain. And it made watching the show way more fun because of just how much variety in both strategy and ability there really was. With this focus on individuality in both ability and expression, it made each blader much more interesting by themselves. But it's when you take those unique personalities and pit them all against each other that the Metal Saga is at its best. At the halfway point of Season 1, the show announces its first major tournament arc, in which the entry requirement is to rack up enough points gained from winning tournaments all across the country. This was the catalyst for every side character to step up and earn their right to compete against the best of the best. And the show spends the next 16 episodes following different characters through various tournaments as they slowly try to qualify for the final event. This did wonders for fully establishing that competitive ecosystem, but most notably it just gave the characters room to breathe by giving them their own self-contained storylines in this group of episodes. This drastically increased the anticipation for the final tournament, as nearly every character in it was given full development. And because of this, it meant that the tournament matches were given some much needed weight and context, using these confrontations as opportunities to express the characters' personalities. And what's more is that while these battles had value as self-contained matches, the series frequently showed how these battles would affect the characters and their relationships long after the match had ended. Even in the case of Ryuga, he goes from a loudly overconfident villain in Season 1 to this kind of amoral force of nature who enters and exits the events of the story as he pleases, which really sold the idea that this world was populated and influenced by people with their own motives and interests separate from the protagonist, and definitely helped the show's world feel a lot more believable. But what's cool is that in his later appearances following the events of the tournament, while Ryuga still wants to be the strongest, there's now a slight air of humility to him, as he focuses on becoming a strong blader through his own merits. And this shift in perspective changes how he interacts with other characters, and eventually leads to the fan favourite dynamic between him and Kenta, a relationship I can only liken to that of Piccolo and Gohan in the early episodes of Dragon Ball Z. Long-term character-specific arcs like this are all over the Metal Saga, and Ryuga's narrative in particular made it clear that there really was some permanent personal consequence from these battles beyond just deciding a winner. Now up until this point, I'm aware that a lot of the plot in this show about spinning tops is insane. I'm not blind to the occasional absurdity and the levels of strength the characters' Beyblades tend to possess, it's just that I don't really care. For all its absurdity, there's a hypnotic chaos to be found in this series, and it served as a hyperkinetic outlet for me as a kid. And that consistent chaos helped you suspend your disbelief and allowed you to get lost in its cathartic insanity. And in fairness to the show, it seems like the creators also aren't blind to how seriously the show takes itself compared to its real-life counterpart. There's an episode in which the two main commentators of Season 2 battle each other for the right to commentate the World Tournament Finals. And to the surprise of the main cast, they both reveal that they have two incredibly rare and powerful Beyblades. The battle is set to begin and, well...
They're actually announcing their own battle!
Look at those things!
The two bays clash fiercely! A violent shockwave rocks the entire stadium!
While this scene is very funny, it's also maybe the most self-aware moment in the series' history. and is an incredibly accurate depiction of what my friends and I looked like battling each other when we were kids. And knowing that the creators are in on how wild the show can feel compared to its real life equivalent made it even easier to suspend your disbelief, making it so you could just sit back, let loose, and enjoy all the destructive mayhem of Beyblade. And with that in mind, it allowed the more emotional and personal character arcs to really shine through and fully develop, with the Metal Saga featuring one of my personal favourites. Masamune enters the Beyblade Metal Saga shortly after the start of its second season. His introduction is lighthearted and fun, and he establishes himself as essentially a secondary protagonist quite quickly. He's incredibly talented and makes that known by beating some of the strongest characters from Season 1. Enough for him to even qualify for Japan's national team to compete in the World Championships. Masamune's personality on the surface is a lot like Jinga's, with the two sharing a sort of brotherly bond with a lot of parallel thinking and a drive to be the best. But what makes Masamune cool is less to do with what he is and more to do with what he isn't. He isn't the prodigal heir of an important historical figure, he isn't the foretold prophecy of some ancient legend, he isn't the product of any secret science experiment, and he doesn't wield a mysterious Beyblade of any notable history. He's just himself, a dude whose main X factor is that he just really loves Beyblade. And in a lot of ways, he's arguably a better protagonist than Jinga because of it. Especially because Masamune's unremarkable origins contribute to him having essentially no plot armor at all, meaning that unlike the other main characters, he's absolutely prone to losing his matches, even ones that he really can't afford to lose. Compared to the other main characters who have incredibly high win rates, Masamune's win-loss ratio is a lot more polarizing, and this absolutely helps the show. When you see someone like Jinga battle, especially in the more plot-relevant matches with higher stakes, you can pretty reliably bet on him winning that match. Not all the time, but definitely above average. It's not a huge fault on the show, it's mainly just the nature of having a strong protagonist in a battle series. But with Masamune, the tension is always through the roof. He's been able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, and he's experienced heartbreaking losses when victory seemed all but guaranteed. What makes this great is that despite every disastrous loss, it's those losses that add immeasurable weight to all of his victories. In a world of Jingas, Kyoyas, and Jesus Christ, Ryugas, Masamune's journey to the top of the world is one that feels a lot more grounded and believable. And really not knowing whether or not he'll win a match really drives up the hype and the emotional investment. And you don't realise how invested you are until you're in the depths of a difficult match with him and feel his blood boil with every attack and every change in strategy. And this aspect of his character is awesome, but it's how the show follows through with this in its third season that really brings it full circle. After the World Tournament concludes, several extremely strong bladers begin popping up around the world, and the main cast begin investigating how they've seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Through some developments in the lore, a number of the main characters along with the newly discovered bladers see their Beyblades evolve and become much stronger. And naturally, Masamune becomes excited at the prospect of this being true for him as well. And from an audience perspective, he is a main character, so it would make sense for this to be the case. But as they encounter more of their new opponents, he begins taking loss after loss, all the while having to watch his peers grow increasingly more powerful as he begins to stagnate and get left behind. And it's after a particularly grueling loss that Masamune begins to lose faith in his abilities, and even laments the fact that he no longer feels like he has what it takes to be number one. I've talked about his win-loss ratio, and it's something that he himself is acutely aware of. During the World Championships, he's seen Jinga and the others win matches that decided their fate in the tournament, with some cases in which Masamune lost his match but the team still advanced due to Jinga and the others. And you can see this weigh on him a lot. Even after winning the World Championships, Masamune is still consistently outshined by the rest of the main cast in this season. And after seeing that, he begins to question himself and his own worth. What value is there to be found in his efforts if he knows he'll never be the best? But in response to this, King, Masamune's friend and rival, confronts him on this reasoning, and asks if his only goal is to be the best. He challenges that mindset here and confronts him over how he's missing the point. If you invest time in something, even if you know you'll never be the best, that itself is its own reward. The journey of applying yourself and giving everything you have to try and improve at something is inherently valuable and worth pursuing. And seeing Masamune's spirits reignite after hearing this made for an emotional arc that was extremely formative for me watching the series as a kid. where a lot of series would take this as a chance to give one of their main characters some newfound power-up or ability, Beyblade doubles down and instead used this moment to teach a surprisingly mature lesson on what it means to not excel at something you love, and how that's completely okay. Although both Beyblade series belong to the same franchise and both feature banger opening theme songs, they both have slightly different appeals in terms of the soundtrack. The instrumentals for both the original series and the Metal Saga are sadly unreleased officially, but the online community has been working to both restore or remix these tracks for us to listen to. The Metal Saga featured more orchestral themes that really enhanced the grander vibe of that series, and really communicated the personal weight of these battles and how much they meant to each character, with a favourite of mine being a battle theme featured in Season 2. So much of the soundtrack has this infectious quality to it, with even the more low-key tracks being these catchy earworms during the show's downtime, like when the characters are training or just relaxing between matches. On top of this, the Metal Saga occasionally featured character-specific themes, which, on top of its self-contained narratives, did wonders for giving the side characters that much more memorability. Like when the main cast have to fight an Egyptian player on the African team in the World Championships. And his theme is just listen. The original series, however, has a lot more upbeat rock music which really emanates that 90s, early 2000s anti-establishment vibe that permeated a lot of media from that era. The most important distinction being that it was once again almost entirely exclusive to the English dub, and even featured full songs with vocals. Again, the English dub really went the extra mile for this series in a way that most anime dubs just don't. I'd show you some of the vocal tracks here, but there are reasons why I don't think I should. But I can share some of the instrumental tracks that played during most of the series battles, and these tracks are just as iconic as the vocal tracks. The way they fit into the battles with such raw build-up and payoff made for one of my favourite anime soundtracks of all time. If you were working on the anime for Beyblade with all these personal narratives and destructive showdowns, you'd eventually have to ask, what should that sound like? Well, it sounds like this. Since I was a kid when I first discovered Beyblade, I didn't really know how to watch the whole show. Although a lot of the earlier episodes aired on live TV, trying to find websites to watch the rest of the anime was super difficult back when I was an idiot child. So if you were like me, you were usually limited to whatever YouTube had available at the time. And what YouTube had available was a massive online community creating Beyblade AMVs. Although earlier episodes were available on YouTube here and there, A lot of the story, especially the later seasons, I had consumed almost exclusively through these AMVs because that's all you could find. It's basically the late 2000s equivalent of watching an entire movie through 50 different TikTok videos. And I think a large part of why this AMV boom happened with Beyblade specifically is due to the nature of the show's soundtrack. Because of the show's high energy music, most battles in the series, especially in the original run of the anime, were paired with those vocal tracks in what essentially already amounted to an AMV. In fact, a lot of these earlier videos were AMVs featuring the official soundtrack of the show, likely due to how the show already packaged that experience in the original episodes. And when I say there was a massive community, I mean it. These videos were doing numbers when they released, reaching views in the hundreds of thousands. If you needed any indication of how hungry people were for these videos, you need only look at the view count, with a lot of them hitting some ludicrous milestones. Take a look at this AMV. It features a battle between Jinga and Kenta in the Metal Saga's final season. With the two being longtime friends from episode 1, this battle has a lot of significance for both characters. And so of course, a lot of AMVs of this battle exist online. How many views do you think this has? If you guessed 1.2 million, you'd be wrong because it's nearly 10 times that with 10 million views. If you needed any confirmation of Beyblade's meteoric rise in popularity online, these numbers from an AMV from 2011 were all the proof you needed. More interesting to me, however, was why these videos worked. A big reason being, in part due to the series' general popularity, but it was also due to just how many self-contained narratives the series had. And because of the show's strong visual storytelling and battle choreography, it meant that you could enjoy a lot of these battles without the need for dialogue, as the show's visuals were already so successful in communicating the momentum and even narrative of its battles, allowing you to instead just indulge in your favourite showdowns while listening to any number of Linkin Park songs. These days, however, it's much easier to watch the show officially due to anime being more widely accessible through streaming. And in fairness to the show, both the original series and the Metal Saga have been made fully available for free on the official Beyblade YouTube channel, which is just a really cool move on their part. But while it's nice and convenient that the full series is easily available today, there was a real charm and mystique to piecing together the story of the series through these AMVs. Using these nuggets of information to make sense of the overall narrative was such a specific, early YouTube experience that I'm very glad I got to be a part of. And I don't think I'll ever not be at least a little nostalgic for that circumstance. With all this said, I hope I've made it obvious that I really love Beyblade. It's been a massive part of my life, both as a hobby that my friends and I bonded over as kids, as well as a series with characters that I grew up with. And in that series, it would feel wrong not to talk about the part of it that stayed with me the most, involving my favourite battle in the entire series, as well as the character at the centre of that narrative. Even if you have a passing familiarity with Beyblade, chances are you've at least heard of or seen Kai. From his introduction in episode 1, he quickly became a fan favourite as Tyson's main rival. Plus, his uniquely sick Beyblade along with his outlandish 2000s character design made his popularity almost inevitable. You have to understand, when you're 10, this guy is like the coolest thing ever. Kai's always been a sort of older brother of the main group, being the far more experienced competitor than any other member of the team. And any time he entered the ring, especially in that first season, you knew you were in for a brutal display of raw strength and calculated destruction. But although he was strong, he was also brash, selfish, and frequently kept to himself about his problems. Despite his intimidating demeanour, he was the one most easily affected by a negative performance, and was often extremely critical of himself and others. And a big part of his story is him learning to accept himself and to accept the help of those around him. He goes from a person who only cares about winning to a person who loves competing. And watching him struggle with his own expectations of himself really struck a chord with me when I first watched this series. And Kai's narrative arc is no better displayed than in his battle against the final villain of the original series, Brooklyn. I mentioned that the original Beyblade isn't all that villain-centric, but the exception to that is Brooklyn. He appears out of nowhere and the show sets him up to be essentially unbeatable. But what makes him such a strong villain in this story isn't his perfectly honed technique or experience, but the complete opposite. In terms of his time spent competing as a blader, Brooklyn is a beginner. The main factor being that he's an extremely talented beginner with an extremely powerful Beyblade. And Brooklyn's natural aptitude stands in stark contrast to the main cast, who we've watched pour blood, sweat and tears into getting where they are today. And nobody takes more issue with this than Kai. Everyone at some point has had their first interaction with that hard work versus natural talent narrative, and for me that was Kai versus Brooklyn. It's difficult for me to be remotely objective about this battle due to how deeply it influenced me as an extremely impressionable child. As far as I knew at the time, this was peak cinema. One thing this fight touched on was the way Brooklyn mocked Kai for his love of Beyblade, looking down on him for taking it even remotely seriously.
You know, I have to admit, I'm a little envious of you. I've never seen anyone get so worked up about a game of spinning tops before. Just play the game! Take it easy. Don't get upset now. I've heard that losing can be frustrating. Of course, I wouldn't know about that. I don't lose.
All the while, Kai is seemingly outclassed by his undeniably strong opponent. And as a kid, that really got to me. At that age, it's not uncommon for kids to be openly judgmental about others. And I'm sure anyone who grew up being into things like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Ben 10, or Beyblade knows exactly what it's like to be met with ridicule by others who didn't share that interest. And with this battle, it became really easy to project yourself onto Kai as he fought back against that exact perception. The idea that your interests don't matter, or the idea that you're taking it too seriously because others say you are. While there are battles with more complicated narratives and better choreography, I cannot undersell the level of emotional weight here. The Rocky Balboa quality that Kai brings to this battle is unmatched. There are so many moments when the show convinces you the match has ended, only for the music to swell as Kai stays standing. Brooklyn has the precision, the strength, the intuition, and the best equipment, but because he's never experienced a loss or setback of any kind, he hasn't been forced to learn the same lessons that Kai has. The moment Brooklyn realizes he's actually at risk of losing, he just doesn't know how to handle it. The moment things don't go as planned, all of a sudden his ego and bravado are out the window, and he becomes an insecure, nervous wreck. As Brooklyn's mentality crumbles, he asks how Kai is able to rebound after every single attack, leading to one of my favourite lines in the entire series.
That's why I have to win this battle! Because Beyblading means more to me than you could ever understand! It's not just a game to me! Finish him now, Bronzer!
As you grow up, that judgment from others doesn't just stop altogether. People will still judge you and look down on you for the things that you choose to invest your time into. It can range from your interests, your career, to basically anything you're really passionate about. I know there's a million series out there with that hard work versus raw talent storyline, but for all those narratives out there, I'm glad my first experience with it was Beyblade. It was comforting to know that even someone as awesome and cool as Kai struggled with the same insecurities and self-doubt as I did. And by this point in the series, he's unapologetically true to himself in the face of those who would try to shun him for it. It can be disheartening when your passion and enthusiasm for something is rejected or mocked by those around you. And so seeing Kai passionately declare his love for what he does was extremely influential on me as a kid, and taught me to pursue what you love no matter what other people think. Whether it's competing in the sport you like, taking a risk on a career you want, or even making videos on the internet. There are more recent Beyblade series that are released after the ones I talked about already. Hell, one of them is a direct sequel to the Metal Saga. But these shows and even the new Beyblades themselves just don't do it for me. In an attempt to try and keep the Beyblade mania going, there were a ton of new gimmicks being released to try and keep it interesting. But all they really did was make a simple game needlessly complicated. I know it's the height of irony for me to accuse Beyblade of only now being too gimmicky, but I do think there's a point to be made here. One of the more popular releases is the Beyblade Burst series, in which the main gimmick is that you can score a win in this show by making your opponent's Beyblade burst apart, as they're designed with this in mind, so that if they're hit hard enough, they'll come apart. And this sounds cool, but for me it comes with a major issue. It's the intentional inclusion of a burst mechanic like this that ironically removes what makes the idea cool in the first place. In the older Beyblade series, seeing someone's Beyblade crumble after a devastating onslaught from an opponent was this shocking, rare occurrence that signaled to you that whoever shattered that Beyblade was not fucking around. And the best part about these moments was how unintended and rare they were. These Beyblades aren't meant to break or shatter during battle, so when someone forces that to happen, it makes for some seriously tense displays of strength that did wonders for showcasing the ferocity of the villains or the triumph of the heroes. And when you try to bottle that feeling and make it something that happens by design, it robs it of the very thing that made it cool in the first place. Even aside from that, there's a few other deal breakers I have for the new series. Another major one being the character designs on the main cast. A lot of the appeal in character design can come down to individual preference, but I think even then, it's hard to argue that a lot of these designs don't just feel a little aimless. You can't glean much of anything about the characters by looking at them, the colour choices are all over the place, and they don't even succeed in terms of just trying to appear stylish for the era they're in. Criticisms that I just can't levy at both older series. The older designs for the main cast were simple and to the point. Take Tyson for example. He has a simple colour palette, wears his hat backwards, and has an early 2000s style that makes him seem like a believable character. Because this is something I could see a teenager wearing in the early 2000s. It not only looks appealing, but it also serves to tell you something about him and his attitude. And you can see this same care across the rest of both previous series, with designs that immediately give you a read on what kind of character they are just by looking at them. Whereas the new series is content to have their characters in seemingly random colour palettes that often don't express anything definitive about them, which is especially unfortunate in a franchise known for some of the most iconic designs in anime from the 2000s. If you're a fan of the newer iterations of Beyblade, my goal here isn't to shit on something you enjoy. Don't let my opinions stop you from liking the things you like. I just wanted to express why modern Beyblade is something that I can't really get into as easily. But it isn't all bad. In that Metal Saga sequel, some adult versions of the main cast appear again in cool ways. And if I'm honest, this design of a grown-up Jenga with his scarf weathered and tattered fucking rules. I think it's alright that Beyblade might not be for me with these more modern releases. Maybe that could change as time goes on, but even if it doesn't, I'm very glad that I got to experience both the original series as well as the initial reboot. Past all the outrageous abilities and scale of what should be a simple game is a series with relatable characters that I could identify with. And I'm not the only one. Through the online community, there are still new AMVs coming out as recently as this year, which is especially telling for a series that ended 20 years ago. Even all these years later, the original voice actors also speak with a fondness for the series that lets you know how much Beyblade meant to them.
I just thought Kai was so cool. I was so excited to get to play him. So I'm honored that there are still fans of Kai and his Bit Beast Dronzer out there. I don't know if I sound like Kai anymore, but I just thought that was so cool.
Another clip I especially love is an interview with one of those national champions of those official real-world Beyblade tournaments, where you can really feel their infectious enthusiasm and you can tell that Beyblade was a massive part of their life. And these official tournaments are still going strong even as recently as this year. And I think when media has this much personal weight to this many people on such an individual level, I think it's a sign that that media is important. I think it's a sign that that media really matters. Hey, thanks for watching this one to the end. This one took some doing, but hopefully I'll have some more videos up much sooner rather than later. If you want to support the channel and help make more videos like this one possible, you can do so through patreon.com/yamchad. There's one tier set at £1 and it would go a really long way to making more of these videos possible. Either way, I'm still really grateful you watched this video all the way to the end. Thanks again for watching and I'll see you next time.